How many secrets can fit inside a family? Is what they tell us really the whole truth? The story you're about to learn today will show you that sometimes the greatest adventure of our lives begins inside a forgotten box, and that the past can be much more surprising than any movie. Get ready. It's not just about an old photo. It's about courage, love, resilience, and those silent choices that change entire generations without most people even realizing it. Isabela thought she knew every detail of her story, until the day she was cleaning her grandmother's attic and found an old photo. A photo that, because it was so simple, seemed innocent. But the truth hidden behind that image was so powerful that it would destroy everything she believed about her family, and rebuild, with much more wisdom, compassion, and inspiration, the way she saw life. If you've ever felt that your story has hidden chapters, if you've ever suspected that there are truths that no one had the courage to tell, this story will touch you. Because deep down, we all carry mysteries in our blood, and maybe, just maybe, they're the key to understanding who we really are. Isabela, with curiosity rising in her chest, ran her fingers over the rough surface of the small box. The lock, rusted by time, offered resistance, as if it held not only objects, but also the very essence of the past. Armed with courage and an improvised key, she forced the lid until she heard the dry click of the latch giving way. The smell of old wood and yellowed paper filled the air. Inside, a forgotten treasure, pieces of letters, a faded ribbon, and, resting at the bottom, a photograph so old that it seemed to whisper stories of love, hope, and loneliness in each faded line. As she lifted the photo, Isabela felt a commotion unlike anything she had ever experienced. There was her grandmother, the woman she had known, as an example of wisdom, kindness, and resilience. But there was something disconcerting. Her grandmother was not alone. Beside her, an unknown man smiled tenderly, both wearing identical wedding rings that shone discreetly in the black and white of time. The detail was impossible to ignore. That simple image, imbued with affection and mystery, made Isabela's world spin for an instant. A whirlwind of questions emerged, mixing fear, insecurity, and a visceral curiosity that was impossible to contain. Holding the photograph reverently, almost afraid that it would fall apart in her hands, Isabela realized that she had just crossed an invisible line, from innocence to the uncertain terrain of truth. The past, which had always seemed so solid, now seemed made of quicksand. And in the midst of that attic full of dormant memories, she felt something stronger than the dust in her eyes. She felt the weight of the stories that had never been told, of the humanity hidden in each silent sacrifice. Without knowing it, Isabela was about to embark on the most profound journey of self-discovery and reconciliation of her life. Isabela came down from the attic, carrying the photograph as if it were a fragment of something sacred. She sat down in her grandmother's old armchair, still impregnated with the soft scent of lavender, and stared at the smiling face of that woman who until yesterday seemed entirely familiar to her. Who could that man be beside her? Doubt hammered her mind, mixing understanding, fear, and a deep uneasiness. She knew that her grandmother had been married for 5 decades to her grandfather, a respected man full of strict traditions. But the photo brought another story to the surface, a silent story, kept with humility and perhaps with painful forgiveness. Isabela's mind was buzzing with questions, and, as happens in the great journeys of life, the answers seemed to hide precisely where it hurt the most to look for them. Was it possible that the woman she admired had lived a life of silent sacrifices? Was it possible that the whole story of unconditional love that she had heard so many times was only a part, perhaps not even the main part, of the story? The feeling was ambiguous, a mixture of respect for the strength of that generation and a deep emotion at realizing how much loneliness and renunciation can fit into an entire life. With teary eyes and a tight chest, Isabela understood that she could not simply close the box and pretend that nothing had happened. Moved by a force that mixed inspiration, courage, and the eternal thirst for truth that lives in sensitive hearts, she decided she would find out everything. Not out of morbid curiosity, but out of gratitude to the woman who had taught her the value of truth, even when it hurts. It was a silent promise, born of affection and empathy. Honoring her grandmother's story would not mean perpetuating half-truths, but rather illuminating with respect and wisdom all the forgotten corners. And it was with this decision that Isabela, without realizing it, began a journey that would forever change the way she saw her family and herself. At the bottom of the box, under some yellowed papers and old ribbons, Isabela found something that seemed even more valuable than the photograph: a letter. Carefully folded, but visibly worn by time, the shaky handwriting betrayed the aged hand that had written it. With her heart pounding, she unfolded it. The words were simple but full of compassion, affection, and a silent pain that had spanned decades. There, between the lines, the grandmother spoke of a forbidden love, of promises made on the verge of the impossible, and of a separation that had not been desired, but imposed. It was a letter that had never been sent, and perhaps never forgotten. Each line read was like a small explosion in Isabela's chest. The grandmother mentioned names she had never heard, dates that did not match the official family stories. She spoke of a man who had been her true love, of plans to escape, of a life they almost had, but that, for reasons of honor and family pressure, had been ripped from their hands. Reading it was a raw lesson on humanity, on how choices are, often shaped more by context than by the desires of the heart. And in each word, Isabela felt the living presence of her grandmother, not as an immaculate saint, but as a woman of flesh, blood, hope, and resilience. Holding the letter and the photograph together, Isabela understood that what she had found was not just a secret. It was the key to understanding an entire generation that loved and suffered in silence, driven by the wisdom of sacrifice. What had previously seemed to be just a mystery now became a mission filled with empathy, altruism, and profound respect. Determined to piece together every piece of this forgotten story, Isabela knew she would have to go beyond the walls of her grandmother's house. She would need to dig deep into the roots of the past, even knowing that sometimes the truth can be as painful as it is liberating. Driven by a mixture of inspiration, hope, and an uncontrollable thirst for truth, Isabela decided she could not stop there. Arming herself with courage, patience, and a pile of notes, she set out in search of the lost pieces of that story. First, she visited old registry offices, where she leafed through records covered in dust and oblivion, facing suspicious looks and systems as archaic as the yellowed papers. With each signature, with each strange date, new questions arose. As she connected scattered clues, she felt that something big, something deeply human, made of love, resilience, and commitment, was pulsing just beneath the surface of the file. Cold documents. Decided to delve deeper, Isabela sought out old neighbors, men and women who still had vivid memories of the old days. In each conversation, she gathered fragments, nostalgic smiles, lost glances, silences that said more than words. One neighbor in particular revealed that the man in the photo had been her grandmother's first and true love, a love forbidden by the conservative families of the time. There was commitment, but also impositions that broke promises made on the edge of flower gardens and letters exchanged in secret. Each story was a shock of understanding and commotion, showing that the past is often woven of courageous silences. With each step taken on this journey, Isabela was not only rebuilding a lost story, she was also rebuilding her own vision of what it means to be human, accepting flaws, acknowledging sacrifices, understanding the complexity of hearts. It was as if each piece she discovered sparked in her chest more gratitude, more affection, more respect for the imperfect humanity that lives within us all. Now, more than ever, she knew that what she was about to discover would not only be about her grandmother or her family. It would also be about who she herself wanted to be, someone who embraces the truth even when it hurts, with the same honesty and kindness that she had learned to admire. As she deepened her searches, Isabela came across truths that hurt more than any invisible thorn in the path. She discovered that her grandmother, young and full of dreams, had been forced to give up the great love of her life in order to preserve the family's honor and status. It was a time when appearances spoke louder than feelings, and choices were made with tears hidden in the pillow. Reading stories, listening to testimonies muffled by time, was like feeling the pain of loneliness, the wound of insecurity, and the echo of broken promises. Each discovery increased the understanding and empathy that Isabela felt for that woman who seemed to have carried the world on her shoulders. It was not easy to digest everything. The image of a perfect, solid family began to crack before Isabela's eyes, revealing layers of raw humanity, of stifled love and renounced dreams. How could she accept that the figures she admired so much lived trapped between fear and obligation? How could she accept the fact that her grandmother's complete happiness was sacrificed in the name of unjust traditions? It was a painful process, but also deeply liberating, because by recognizing these truths, Isabela not only saw her roots with more wisdom, she also reconciled herself with her own fragility, understanding that being human is being imperfect, but also deeply capable of perseverance and altruism. Weeping softly as she leafed through the pages of forgotten history, Isabela realized that there is greatness in those who love silently, in those who renounce without losing their sweetness, in those who choose the path of kindness even when the world is cruel. And more than ever, she felt that the photograph found in the attic was not just a memory. It was an invitation to reconcile herself with her own story, with the silent sacrifices and the invisible force that brought her there. And little did she know that the answers she still needed could lead her to an encounter that would change everything. With each new revelation, Isabela felt the weight of the truth settle on her chest like a heavy stone to carry. It wasn't just her grandmother's story that was crumbling in her concepts. It was the story of her entire family, of everything she had believed in her entire life. Who, in fact, was the man she called grandfather? Was he just a victim of circumstances, or also an accomplice to an unjust imposition? The questions piled up, mixing insecurity, understanding, fear, and a strange feeling of loneliness, as if the familiar ground was crumbling beneath her feet. But with the resilience she had inherited without knowing it, Isabela understood that she had to go on to the end. There were days when she thought about stopping, about closing the box, putting away the photo, pretending the attic had never been opened. But the thirst for inspiration, for truth, spoke louder. It was as if her grandmother, somewhere in time, was silently encouraging her to continue. And indeed, when you search with an open heart, you don't just find pain, you also find beauty. The beauty of humanity that is imperfect, but capable of grand gestures of love, affection, and kindness. With each secret revealed, Isabela felt more compassion for the strong woman who, even with a broken heart, built a home full of light for the following generations. And it was in this process, between tears and melancholic smiles, that Isabela began to accept that every family carries invisible scars, that loving also means accepting the cracks, the silences, the silent sacrifices, and that being faithful to those we love means looking at these truths with respect, gratitude, and humility, without hasty judgments. Amidst the pain and tenderness, a quiet strength was born within her, the certainty that even without having all the answers, she was honoring her grandmother's legacy in a way that would make her proud. And it was with this spirit that she continued on, ready to face the next and perhaps most delicate chapter of this journey. Fate, that old storyteller, seemed to have already written the next page of Isabela's life. In the midst of her tireless research, she discovered that the man in the photo that lost love from her grandmother's youth was still alive. Secluded, in a small town in the countryside, far from the eyes and pressures that had once separated him from the great love of his life. With her heart racing with a mixture of hope, fear, and inexplicable courage, Isabela decided she needed to find him. It wasn't curiosity, it was understanding. It was the deep desire to close a cycle, to give voice to a story that had been silenced for so long. The trip there was filled with emotion. Every kilometer traveled seemed to cross not only roads, but also layers of time itself. When she finally arrived, she found a man with a tired but still bright look, a look that carried years of loneliness, resilience, and hidden affection. The meeting was a mix of silent tears, shy smiles, and a conversation so intense that words sometimes seemed unnecessary. He recognized Isabela's grandmother right away. Her eyes lit up in a way that only those who truly love someone understand. It was a moment of pure emotion, one of those moments when we know that we carry eternity within us. There, in front of that man who grew old, nurturing the memory of a forbidden love, Isabela understood something that no research, no document, could teach: the strength of feelings that survive life's worst storms. The conversation revealed truths, tears, and laughter that reconstructed the story like a tapestry embroidered with empathy, altruism, and a silent courage to move forward, even with scars on her chest. And it was at that moment that Isabela felt that by seeking out her grandmother's story, she had also found a new meaning for her own life, but there was still more to be understood. Returning home, with her heart still warmed by the intensity of the encounter, Isabela carried something that was not just information, it was a new way of seeing life. For the first time, she understood that her family's past was not a tapestry of perfection, but rather a mosaic of difficult choices, painful sacrifices, and silent love. Every tear, every renunciation, every gesture hidden behind traditions was, in fact, a living proof of wisdom, perseverance, and profound compassion. And in that understanding, she felt a mixture of gratitude and reverence for each untold story that she now helped to illuminate. Isabela no longer saw life with the same naive eyes as before. Instead, she embraced the complexity of humanity with respect, recognizing that loving often also means knowing how to let go, knowing how to be silent, knowing how to sacrifice. She realized that her grandmother's strength was not in having been perfect, but in having maintained her sweetness, even when her heart was broken. This new vision of the past was like a lens that transformed everything. She saw beauty in the cracks, tenderness in the flaws, inspiration in the silences. And, curiously, by discovering so much about others, she began to discover more about herself. Thus, Isabela began to carry within herself not only the genetic legacy of her family, but also an emotional inheritance made of affection, kindness, and immense resilience. What had previously seemed like a burden, the painful truth, now became an inexhaustible source of inspiration to live more truthfully, more courageously. And in each small decision of her daily life, she felt that she was honoring in her own way the love story that once dared to resist time, impositions, and conventions. But there was still a step to be taken, and Isabela knew, deep down, that this change needed to be reflected in the way she herself chose to live. The yellowed photograph, now carefully kept in a simple frame, became for Isabela more than a memory. It was a symbol, a daily reminder that life, however unpredictable and painful it may be, always offers us the chance to choose between following the expected path or creating our own, with courage, love, and sincerity. Inspired by her grandmother's story of sacrifice and resistance, Isabela decided that she would no longer live under other people's expectations. She would choose her dreams, her truths, even if it meant facing fear, insecurity, and even loneliness. Because now she knew, truly living requires resilience and hope in every step. Just like someone planting a new seed in fertile soil, Isabela began to make decisions that brought her closer to herself. She changed careers, sought to study something. She had always secretly loved and reconnected with people who shared the same values of honesty, kindness, and affection. She left behind the need for approval that had chained her for so long. And little by little, she discovered that true freedom comes from the humility to recognize our own vulnerabilities and the confidence to follow what makes our hearts sing. Even if the whole world tries to tell us otherwise, the closed attic, the forgotten box, the dusty photograph, none of this was by chance. It was as if life, with its eternal wisdom, had prepared that moment to awaken something dormant within her. And now, every time Isabela looked at the image of her grandmother smiling next to the great love of her life, she felt an unshakable certainty. The most profound gestures do not need to be shouted to the world to be great. They echo in eternity through those who have the courage to love, to fight, to remain faithful to what is most pure. Just like her grandmother, just as she herself was beginning to learn, to write her own story. And now I ask you, Have you ever stopped to look at your own story with new eyes? How many truths could be hidden, waiting only for a little courage, empathy, and understanding to come to light? Sometimes, what we fear discovering is exactly what can free us, transform us, and make us see the profound beauty that exists in every imperfection in life. Have you been faithful to your dreams? Have you been living your story the way you really wanted to? Or do you still carry fears and insecurities inherited from past generations? Life is too brief an adventure to be lived according to the expectations of others. It is time to choose the path of honesty, inspiration, and wisdom that only those who dare to truly feel can achieve. If this story touched your heart in some way, if it inspired you to reflect, to want to live with more truth and affection, then come with me. Subscribe to the channel here, turn on notifications, and continue diving into stories that awaken, that welcome, and that remind you. Changing your life is possible. You just need to have the courage to open the right doors, even the ones forgotten in the attic of our own hearts.